Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
Hi there, and welcome to episode 70 of the Art of Procurement show. And today I have another insightful interview lined up for you. My guest today is two-time procurement entrepreneur Stephany Lapierre. Stephany founded Matchbook back in 2008 to provide sourcing services to healthcare companies with a vision to make the RFP process a lot more efficient and targeted for participants on both sides of the RFP process. And while managing sourcing projects for clients, Stephany would watch as her clients struggled to identify qualified suppliers to send those RFPs to, especially in particularly niche categories that are often the norm in healthcare and in biotech. So having identified that need, Stephany then set out about building her second company, Tealbook, with a vision of building a comprehensive online supplier knowledge management platform. And Steph and I met for the first time a couple of months ago at an industry event and talked about all things Supplier Discovery. I knew when we talked that she'd make a great guest on the show, and so I was delighted when she accepted my offer to sit down and share her experiences with us here on the Art of Procurement. So in our conversation, Steph shares the most effective ways that she has found so far, and I think that she definitely speaks from a position of authority, of discovering qualified suppliers to invite to your next RFP, or to include in the development of your category strategy. Before we head into the show, just a quick reminder, if you enjoy the show and you haven't done so already, you can head over to artofprocurement.com/subscribe, and I'll send you an email every time an episode is published. That way you don't have to keep refreshing your podcast app to see when the next episode hits. All right then, well, with all that being said, let's go straight into the show. So hi there, and welcome to another Art of Procurement Tuesday interview show. And as I mentioned in my introduction, I'm joined today by Stephany Lapierre, the founder and CEO of Tealbook. So Steph, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks. And Steph and I first met actually a couple of months ago over breakfast omelets in downtown San Francisco. And we were both opining on all things procurement. And it was then that I invited Steph to come on the show and was thrilled that you immediately accepted. So we're delighted we're now able to actually come together and record. And of the things we talked about over that breakfast, the one that I really wanted to get into today is the challenge that we have of supplier discovery. And that's how can we as procurement professionals do a better job at quickly identifying qualified suppliers for inclusion in sourcing events, for consideration in category strategies. And I know that this is an area where Steph has a lot of experience. But before we go there, I'd like to just for the audience to get a little bit to know you, to get to know you a little bit more. So I wanted to ask about the fact that, you've started a couple of businesses, I think 2 now. What's the motivation? Why are you putting yourself through the ringer? You've done it once, now you're doing it again.
Well, it's a bit of a curse, I think, to have this entrepreneur blood, maybe. I think it's to solve problems. Mm-hmm. And I started my first company, Matchbook, which is a sourcing consulting service to fast-growing companies who don't have procurement or sourcing. And I just saw in my own experience as a client, I was also on the supplier side, that the amount of time it required for employees to do the due diligence and be able to tap quickly outside of their own supplier network was just very time-consuming and limited, and really took them away from tasks that were, somewhat maybe more important or prioritized on their day-to-day. That prompted me to launch Matchbook, and it was to solve and to bring more efficiency to the supplier discovery and sourcing process. And the same with Steelbook. With my experience working across 40 plus large to small, companies that had all level on the spectrum of procurement sophistications and tools and processes, noticed that they were all experiencing the same inefficiencies where the information was very siloed. And it was very difficult to share intelligence and build legacy and access information on suppliers. So I think it's the desire to solve problems that's motivating me to work around the clock to build these businesses. But it's extremely gratifying, so I enjoy it a lot.
It's not an easy life, and you sign up for it. So it's not that anybody puts you through it. You're signing up for it yourself. It's
self-inflicted, that's for sure.
And I know when we talked, you said that you have 3 small children at home. And, I know how hard 2 kids is, so I can't imagine 3. How do you juggle everything?
It's I think as maybe women, not to take away the man's ability to multitask, but I think we have a bit of a sixth sense for multitasking. Being extremely organized and having a village. And, I work a lot. I do travel a lot. And it's making my kids know that it's part of the day-to-day, and that's what I do. And I'm building something that I'm very passionate about. And so I don't hear a lot of complaints. They're very happy and they're very well surrounded and a lot of consistency. And they ground me, when I'm home in the weekends or evening, or I take my kids to birthday parties or soccer games. It takes me away from thinking about work, which is a blessing, and it brings you back to what's really important, and it brings you back to work, I think, more refreshed and re-energized in a different way.
Yeah, it's hard to step away sometimes.
It is, yes. But there's nothing like a 3-year-old, at a birthday party, looking at a princess to kind of bring you back to other things.
No, that's what I'm always getting in trouble with as well with my wife is just, especially now that we have these little boxes that are attached to us that we can basically run our businesses from. It's so hard to actually step away from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have rules in our house, so there's certain times of the day, especially before bedtime, where we put phones down and away. Unless there's something that's really, important. But I think it's taking the time to sit and be present as much as you can when you are.
Right.
And then, it's sacrifices in different ways. But, when you're focused and you're motivated building a company, you need to do what you need to do.
Right.
And family, come first. And it's hard sometimes, but that's what we try to, between my husband and I, to juggle, or both are very busy work life and travel, and to being as best parents and give us the best example. I've got 3 girls, so being a strong businesswoman and doing things that makes me really happy and passionate and brings a lot of gratification to my day-to-day life I think it's a great example to set.
Yeah, to prove that you can pursue your dreams. Don't feel inhibited by, I guess, personal circumstance, that there's nothing that really stops you from going and doing the things that you want to do.
Yeah, and I think in one of my first blogs, I had a little story about having one of my oldest daughter's friend in the car, and I asked her what she wanted to do when she grew up, and she said she wanted to be a mummy. And my daughter, Chloe, said, well, you can be a mother and be something else. Right. You can be whatever you want. And I was so filled with pride because that's what they, that they know that they can really do whatever they set on their passionate, whatever that is.
So what I wanted to talk about really today was, I mentioned it in the intro about how we can actually find and discover suppliers. And I know that you recently did a survey that I just wanted to touch on first around how you can improve the discovery of strategic suppliers. And there were some really interesting points that came out as I started to read through the survey. I just wondered if you could provide just a little bit more background on what it is and maybe some of the key results.
Yeah, I mean, we being on, my team is all come from, most of us, except for our technology and development team, come from procurement. And I think everybody's very passionate about what we're building because they've seen firsthand the inefficiencies of the process and information and internal and external sources of supplier intelligence. And so, but we wanted to quantify that and be able to turn it into a white paper. And so in collaboration with ProcureCon, we were able to ask some questions around, the not just necessarily the time spent to identify qualified suppliers, which we were able to gather, and not surprised. The data came to that 83% of responded said it takes 1 to 6 weeks or more to identify qualified suppliers.
Okay.
And we had a roundtable in February with 15 pretty senior procurement professionals talking about this data point. And they debate that in some cases it takes a lot longer if it's new categories or categories that require a lot more due diligence. And, talking about the impact of that and what does that mean if it does take 1 to 6 weeks of doing fairly tactical research and data collection on suppliers, could you spend your time more efficiently?
Right.
And what is the cost of that, not just in, hours, but also if you're not having the information at your fingertip when you need it, when internal partners are coming to procurement for recommendations and to initiate the process, if it does take a long time, is there duplication of efforts being taken into place? Are they going to start calling their colleagues and their contacts to start building while procurement is going through this fairly tactical process?
You already lose the opportunity to engage with them on the project because if you can't help them immediately, they're already moving on to somebody else who can help them.
Yeah, and are they going to come back? If you don't have the information and the instant value, are they going to come back to you next time they have a need, or are they going to start prompting the due diligence on their own?
Right.
And to me, when you're looking at procurement, it's in the demand of procurement to be a lot more strategic and not be so tactical. If it does take 1 to 6 weeks of very tactical work, taking that away and giving information, instant access to information and the right information, what else could procurement do with their time? And we've asked that recently in a different survey, and we're collecting the data now, but I'll be curious to see what comes out, to see, where would you spend your time? And could you spend more time thinking strategically about, how can procurement or the processes, or, the plan could affect not just the bottom line, but the top line, or look for innovative suppliers, or maybe, get to understand internal partners' business and goals.
Focus on relationships.
Exactly. Yeah. So to me, that's one of the data points that struck to me the most. And, we also, there's so many sources, and we've often talked to procurement of where do they begin the process when there is a need for a new supplier, or even to look outside of their own network or within their own network. How do they go about discovering suppliers or getting information? And you hear the same things. They're going to talk to, obviously, internal peers. They're going to go to potentially their master list, their ERP system, or their contract to see who got a PO. If there's a portal or a SharePoint that has information, maybe they may go there, but they find the information to become stale fairly quickly. Mm-hmm. And then there's all the others, trade publications, trade shows, reports you can purchase, etc. Google, internet is a great tool as well. But it all takes an enormous amount of time to collect this information. But when you ask them which one is the most trusted source of recommendation, we had over 70% that said that it really comes from their peers, people that they know, they've worked with in the past in the same industry. And how do they capitalize on that information outside of hallway conversation is really hard. It usually sits in people's head, buried into a file or a SharePoint or in a stack of business cards in their drawer or in a binder under their desk. And so, that to me is such an important, opportunity if you're able to extract or access this enormous pool of intelligence from people that you know and trust, how much more actionable and trusted your decision or your recommendation would come from.
And so I'm imagining that when so many people look to their peers and their internal partners to get information, that is, it's the most trusted sources, but it's not necessarily the easiest to gather the information because you don't necessarily know who has it and who has the knowledge of that supply base for a particular category. It can often relate to lots of searches and lots of email folders.
Well, that's the inspiration for the word tealbook came from a client that years ago, she grabbed this giant binder from under a desk. She had been with J&J for many, many years. And she put this giant binder on their desk to look for a supplier that she wanted me to know about. And it took her about 10 minutes to sort through, and there's paper falling off everywhere. And, some pamphlet had been now yellow because they're so old. And I walked away from that meeting thinking, how on earth do we not have a better place to store and put information on supplier connections that we have, and all this intelligence that she had in this binder, again, was really sitting under a desk, not benefiting her peers, not benefiting her in really in an actionable way, and certainly not benefiting the company. And so that's where, the word tealbook came from, your card book, your black book of supplier connections. Because there's, if you have access to that and you can collectively build the most trusted source of intelligence, then you're able to make, decisions that are really coming from, who you work with, similar trends, requirements, and their function, and the general perspective, not just a one potentially biased or subjective opinion. There's 2 data points from the survey that we were able to pull out. Is one, how are procurement professionals sharing supplier intelligence internally? And we got that 78% are sharing this in person. And depending on the size of the company, as you can imagine, your people that are around your desk or that you're able to bump into at meetings are it's not necessarily the most efficient way of gathering this insight. And we recently we were doing video interviews with internal partners, and we asked them, how are you sharing supplier intelligence within your own company? And they smile. They say at the water cooler, maybe if someone is new coming into the company, it's certainly not information wrapped in a pretty little bow. It's emails being basically forwarded as they are being found to be able to pass along information and build institutional knowledge. And that's just missing legacy. And teams are changing and people are turning over. And if you're not able to share that,
there's like no knowledge base.
Exactly. And I've been in that situation, through my consulting business, sitting in meetings where we had initiated RFP process weeks ago. We were now in the final stages of the RFP, and someone would come at a meeting with some very critical insight on a supplier that we just did not know, which impacted the search and our selection. But if we had known that up front, we would have made very different decisions from the beginning and not wasted the supplier's time or our time on a supplier that we couldn't engage. And so that's one of, thousands of examples where if there's a better way to share internally information, not just in person and even through emails get lost. And a lot of companies now have policies after a couple of years that, all of the older files get deleted. Well, then you just lost your legacy right there.
So what I wanted to do then is, you obviously have a lot of background and experience and also passion for helping procurement organizations finding the right supplier in real time. And so I was interested to understand, what are some of the, I don't know if I would call them secrets or tips or tactics that procurement professionals can undertake to really find the right supplier for their next bid, for their sourcing project, for their category strategy, particularly if it's in an area where they're not necessarily an expert in the market. So it's somewhere that they're kind of starting from scratch in terms of supply discovery. So what would you recommend that sourcing professionals do?
Yeah, I mean, I tell my, on our team, on our my consulting business where procurement works with different clients, sometimes there's a procurement consultant that will come to me and say, I don't know that space. I want to talk to the client more extensively because I have questions. And my recommendation to them is to go to suppliers first. Because there's such a wealth of information. They're usually the expert in what they do. They publish, they attend conferences, they solve problems or similar challenges across many companies. And so taking the time and using them as a source of intelligence, I find that to be extremely valuable. It also allows you to understand what key success factors they have seen in the past and what's worked for clients that had similar challenges. So I definitely think it's a source that procurement should definitely tap into upon initiating the process. And it will also help formalize and ask the right questions so that when you're discussing, especially if it's a new category, so that you can have a more educated decision or discussion and asking the right questions to your internal partners and really understanding what are their critical requirements and not making assumptions on what you think that may be. I found that when you ask internal partners to build a list, it's sometimes, it's surprising and it's important because they know what they may be lacking or what they feel is most important to their business. And that to me, would drive the process of the supplier discovery. I think for everybody's sake and time is really establishing clear expectations about the process and what are the desired outcome and the timelines. And I find suppliers will have a much better experience throughout the process when it's clearly stated, and internal partners will also understand what needs to happen for the not just the supplier discovery, but also validating suppliers and then go through the entire process. And so establishing expectations up front.
Sorry, Steph. So you mentioned about the suppliers themselves being a great source of intelligence. Do they refer you to others in the marketplace, or do suppliers typically say, "Hey, you're on your own. I'm not really going to share that because I might be putting you in the direction of my competitors"?
That's a good question. I mean, it depends on the suppliers. I certainly have received recommendation, especially if they don't feel it's direct competition. Or I've asked, is there anybody else that you would recommend, especially if they turn down the opportunity or we feel we establish up front it's not a good fit, and they may provide some recommendations. So certainly, and looking, and that's what we're aiming to do with our technology, is to be able to show who else may be a good fit, so that information is easily accessible. But traditionally, I have asked suppliers, who their competition, who do they tend to lose business to the most often. Go head to head in RFP so that I understand really who provides potentially equal value or could be a strong candidate. I think also, obviously, internal and industry peers are, as we mentioned earlier, they're to be the most trusted source of recommendation. So I think starting there and asking them up front who do they want to include in the process, even though they may not be a preferred supplier, a supplier who has a contract, I think is allowing for new suppliers that have a relationship with internal partners to be part of the process and benchmark them so that they know that they're making the right decision. And I find that to be, sometimes the ones that they want to include are actually not the right one.
Right.
And to me, it's important because if they had just gone to who they knew, they would have not had the opportunity to see other really strong options. So giving them that option and making them feel like they're owning the decision on who they want to do business with, I think is really important.
As a buyer, I was always hesitant to ask my stakeholders, as I thought it showed that I didn't really understand the market. So do you think there's something in that, or that when you look internally, you should not ask your stakeholders? Or, it sounds like you think that stakeholders are fine. They obviously have an opinion, just so long as you do it in a way that doesn't suggest that you really don't understand the market.
Well, I mean, I'm going back to my consulting side. When we would ask our customers, who would be internal partners, they knew they were hiring us for our knowledge. And so, I think asking them who they thought should be included and who should not, because we didn't want to come in with a list of recommendations and provided someone that they had a really bad experience with in the past. And so I think it's understanding sort of their level of knowledge. Some will say, I have no idea. Then that they're really starting from ground zero and you have sort of carte blanche on who you should be including. Others will have very strong opinions. And so to me, that would dictate how I would work with them, how I would make them involved as part of the process, or how much they should be, or they are willing to be involved, and how much, sometimes that may weigh into the decision. And so I can manage expectations throughout the process. So I would definitely not shy away from asking their opinion. I think then you're coming across a lot more collaborative, and I don't think it shows weakness or lack of knowledge. I think it just shows that you're interested in knowing who they are looking to.
That's a good point.
And I think another point, I think it's taking chances on new suppliers that have a different approach. So in most sourcing events that I've managed personally, or my procurement team would, it would really be to look at, some suppliers that are well known and trusted and have been considered the gold standard, and then bringing new ones that are maybe doing things a little differently. And then it's again setting expectations when they're going through the process. And also, I communicated that with suppliers themselves, that they're a little bit outside of potentially what we're looking for, but we're willing to give them the chance. I find that tremendously educational. It's great market research to know what are the trends, and sometimes it's led to internal partners making a very different decision on who they want to work with, because we challenge their thinking and we challenge the status quo. And again, not being stale. And if you want to stay in a competitive environment, you have to look at doing things differently and giving those suppliers a chance, even though they're not, the gold standard. They're sitting, on the top of the quadrants. I think it's, establishing requirements and making sure that they meet what's important, but the rest is to be a little bit more creative.
Is there a wow factor that you look for that, convinces you to take a chance on a new supplier?
I think it's the way their offering is communicated. It's the problem that they may solve, and if they're a new company, of why they have established this company or this process, or what they're doing is so important. It's a bit of a passion. I tend to have a softer spot for companies who really want the business, because I do feel that they're the ones that are going to potentially be better partners. Not always, but often.
They'll invest more in the relationship.
Exactly. Through tealbook, we have supplier profiles, and I see the difference between suppliers who have the basic information and the ones that really want you to know them. And they have many opportunities within a tealbook profile to differentiate their offerings and add a slide deck, that we always sort of shove somewhere in a file, and really bring to life their capabilities and offering. And so there's a bit of a wow factor, when you see that kind of commitment and ability to communicate what they do well, that to me speaks that they may have also the opportunity to communicate that internally and be able to manage our teams, and delivering the good work. So there's maybe that wow factor. Yeah, and then, sometimes also peer recommendations when you're talking about what's new and what's innovative. We had recently an IT procurement professional that talked to us about a very cool new company that was doing something very different on the travel side. And, there's a bit of a wow, I want to learn more. I want to be able to share that knowledge with my clients. And so I think getting access to peers, feedback and people that you trust that have a wow impression of a supplier, then that gets you to think also that you should take a look at it. I think it's Mary Kaczynski presented this at ProcureCon in a different talk, is not just to be so concerned about the number of suppliers, but making sure that you're getting the right suppliers. Yeah. And I think traditionally we hear still a lot of reducing the supplier base and centralizing it. And to me, it comes with, it's so time consuming to identify suppliers and go through the supplier discovery process. That makes a ton of sense. And there's obviously, the economies of scale and leveraging some suppliers. But if there's a way to accelerate the supplier discovery process, and if you could get access to all of the strongest suppliers each time, would you have the opportunity to maybe challenge, the centralization and the reducing the supplier base to make sure that you access the right supplier for each time, increase value, increase competition? And we're hearing that from trends and more of a progressive movement of procurement thinkers that do believe to have faster, better access to large marketplace of suppliers so that they can move the supply engagement process each time much more efficiently. Yeah. And that there's definitely some cost saving opportunities, but there's also increasing value and access to these very unique suppliers or diversity suppliers. If that's an important metric in your company, they're very hard to access. And so I think that's what we're doing is hopefully meaningful in that evolution of procurement in the supplier discovery process. Also, don't wait for internal partners to come to you. Someone in procurement recently said that their leadership team says don't be hunters, not gatherers. So there's definitely expectations on procurement to go out there and identify innovative suppliers, innovative solution that will help drive the business forward and stay competitive and not just dependent on cost savings. And so I think if you do, again, it comes back if you have more time, and I don't know any procurement team that are well necessarily or not lean on resources. Right. So I know time is definitely a challenge, but if you're able to take away some of that tactical upfront and you're able to spend more time with the business function, is really understanding what their goals are, what's coming up, being able to start proactively looking for information and educating yourself, not just on what's being done in the industry or trends, but also suppliers that may bring value. And sometimes if you really do know what internal partners are working towards, they may not even prompt a supplier need, but more of a challenge that they're trying to solve. Yeah. And that could potentially come from a supplier that, if procurement had the time, that it could discover it, provide a solution without necessarily having a RFP requirement. And so, I think that's where procurement can really affect its relationship and bring tremendous value to their internal partners in the business.
Yeah, what you said there is it's so important that if we can help our business solve challenges, not help them find suppliers, at least in the way that they look at us, and obviously helping them solve challenges, we need to find suppliers. But what our selling point to them is to solve challenges. That takes us to a different level because that makes us a more integral part of their business.
Yeah, absolutely. No questions there. But it's time and access to information. Yeah. And that's what we're obviously preaching. And then there's expensive resources. It doesn't always lead to finding the best suppliers. No. There's a lot of money spent on reports and different, sources of external intelligence. And so, I think if we're also looking at cost savings, for me personally, it hasn't equated always to finding the best suppliers. It's given me maybe a little bit more information to make a better or more educated decision, but it hasn't necessarily impacted the decision of my internal partners. And so that's just a little observation from my own experience. And also we talked a lot about using supplier intelligence and their expertise to educate, procurement. One thing that we've done through Tealbook is we have a platform called Tealboard, and the essence of Tealboard is to be able to curate social media feeds from suppliers, and to a dashboard that's really focused on your business functions and suppliers that are supporting that function. And so if you're in manufacturing or you're in distribution, you're in research or marketing, whatever your function is, suppliers that are going to be in your Tealbook and connected are going to be, very close to your business and are going to be the ones publishing articles and speaking at conferences and working with different clients and really being on the forefront of the news and trends that are related to your function. And so, we want to push that intelligence further in terms of what Tealboard will provide, but to me it's an amazing source of intelligence because if I miss a conference or if there's a hot topic happening in one of our clients' categories, I can just go in and search with keywords and be able to pull social media feeds from trusted suppliers and be able to instantly access articles on those topics and bringing my level of knowledge and expertise up very, very quickly.
What kind of things are you looking for when you're looking at social media? Are you connecting with just their corporate feeds, or are you pulling in any keywords or any searches that are maybe related to the business that particular supplier is in to give you a broader look? And how can somebody do that on their own?
Well, for Tealbook, we have social media in the different places. So supplier profile, we pull from Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So directly on their profile, so it keeps the information current and up to date on what they're speaking about on the dashboard. So if I go to my Tealbook through the app or the desktop, right away I'm going to see social media, the latest social media feeds from my suppliers. And then on Tealboard, it's all suppliers that are part of Tealbook. So we now have through our partnership with Dun & Bradstreet access to 1.5 million suppliers. So as they're coming to Tealbook and they're updating their information and adding their social media feed, it allows me to answer a few keywords that I'm, maybe a conference or a keyword, and it will very quickly filter through all the suppliers in Tealbook that are talking or writing about that topic. And so prioritizing suppliers that are either in my own Tealbook or in my company's Tealbook, so that are supporting essentially my business or have a connection. So it's just allowed to be less cluttered. I find, LinkedIn is a great resource for content, but it's my LinkedIn is I've got over 3,000, I think, connections. Right. So it's very diluted with a lot of information about careers, trends, and things like that. And so if I want to have specific news relevant to my function and my business that could be helpful to be a better category expert and be able to translate that intelligence into value to my internal partners, I would go to my Teal board and be able to search information there very quickly.
No, and that's a good point. As we get more and more connections through social media, the ability to use it as a curation tool actually becomes weaker and weaker. And, I think about that from my Twitter feeds. I used to use Twitter as my news, essentially my news site. But then as I have more going on within my Twitter feed, it's just really hard to pick out the stuff that's important, and it becomes less useful to use it in that way. So I definitely agree. As you get more and more connections, it's harder to actually get the content that's interesting and that's useful to you as easily as it may have been in the past.
Mm-hmm. In our future, someone asked me recently, where's the future of Tealbook? And, I have no interest in we don't have an RFP tool or an e-sourcing module. And, my focus is more on developing the other side of intelligence and be able to bring not just social media feeds from suppliers, but also social media feeds that are related to the industry and to suppliers. They're not necessarily issued by suppliers, but that are coming. So forecast news, financial news. And we're looking to also integrate some of the Dun & Bradstreet, data directly into the platform. So those are all ways that we want to expand intelligence and really allow procurement to have instant access to a centralized, collective, resource of intelligence to make faster and better decisions. And, again, it just comes back to, access to information. So the faster you can identify the best suppliers and not having to go back to the well, but the first time around, the more value you bring to your internal partners and obviously your organization. A lot of companies are about speed, keeping up with internal partners, keeping up with their goals, with their needs, and the needs of the business is really important. And so no matter how many times you can explain the proper process to internal partners, if they need a supplier yesterday, they don't care about the proper process. Right. They want the supplier, yesterday. So I think the faster you can make those really good decisions and bring credible, relevant suppliers to the table at your fingertips, I think, the more value and the more you're going to be able to gain that instant trust and build that relationship and that collaborator.
So as we record this, we're actually coming to the top of the hour. So I actually, just as we wrap up, was interested if you could share where listeners can find a little bit more information or where they can find you if they'd like to talk about any of the topics that you've raised today in a bit more detail, and then I'll link those up in the show notes that we have.
Yeah, I mean, we're very outspoken about the importance of supplier discovery and access to supplier intelligence. We are launching our new homepage at tealbook.com in June, so mid-June, with a resource center. So we will have video perspectives from procurement. We have a white paper that's going to be available, more white papers to come. We are doing more surveys, a lot of articles that we post on our blog at tealbook.blog.com. And I'm also very, I don't know if loud or outspoken on LinkedIn or present, visible on LinkedIn. I do blog once a week, and engage into conversation. So please add me or connect on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to make that connection.
Okay, perfect. So what I'll do is I will link up to all those the sites and to your profile on LinkedIn. Those will be at artofprocurement.com/supplier discovery. That's artofprocurement.com/supplier discovery. So, Steph, I just want to thank you very much for your time today. And thanks for joining me.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored.
And thanks. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.